making the claim in this book, proposing that sugar is more deadly than tobacco. And what makes it easy to do is this notion that tobacco wouldn't have killed nearly as many people if it wasn't for the sugar in the leaves. So the great technological breakthrough in the tobacco industry in the second half of the 20th century was something called flue curing tobacco. And when you flue cure tobacco, you dry the leaves over this hot air that's blown up, and it increases the sugar content of the leaf from about 3% to perhaps 20%. And now when you increase the sugar content, you have a tobacco that can be inhaled deeply into the lungs. It's alkaline instead of acidic, and you can inhale without triggering your cough reflex. The problem is, these flue-cured leaves, Virginia tobacco, had a relatively low nicotine content. So now you have a leaf that you can inhale as a cigarette but is not very addictive. And in a stroke of genius or serendipity or whatever it was, in 1913, when R.J.R. Reynolds was sort of reconstituted in this, the Supreme Court broke up the Tobacco Trust, and one of the companies that came out of it was R.J.R. Reynolds, and they had been a company that sold chewing tobacco, which is called plug tobacco, and plug tobacco is actually marinated in what's called a sugar sauce. Sugar, maple syrup, licorice, you name it, it's what gives chewing tobacco, makes it tasty. I don't know how else to describe it. And the plug tobacco, the marinated plug tobacco, also has a high sugar content, but it has a high nicotine content. So R.J.R. Reynolds blended together the plug tobacco marinated in sugar sauce with the flue-cured Virginia tobacco with the high sugar content, and the result was a tobacco that has a high nicotine content and a high sugar content that could be inhaled easily into the lungs, where the nicotine can stimulate the addiction. You won't cough, so children and women can smoke it easily as well, and it has a high potential to cause lung cancer because the carcinogens are now being inhaled deeply into the lungs, and your lungs have a surface area roughly the size of a tennis court where these carcinogens can do their damage. Camel, the first American blended cigarette, was released in 1913. By 1920, it was the most popular cigarette in America. By the early 1930s, virtually every American cigarette was blended of this flue-cured tobacco and the sugar sauce plug tobacco. You look in the historical records and you see that lung cancer was virtually non-existent in medical records prior to 1915. So Camel's come along in 1913, and from 1915 onward you could just see this steady rise in lung cancer, and it's all without the sugar content of the leaves and the sugar saucing of the plug tobacco. It just doesn't happen.